Mr. Speaker, this is my third budget contribution and my first as parliamentary leader of the opposition. It is a privilege and a great honour to lead the opposition in this House on behalf of the people of Gibraltar. Mr. Speaker, before I get on to the substance of my address, we must of course recognise the work of the Clerk of the House, Paul Martinez, Francis, Kevin, Daniel, and of course you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to echo the words of the Chief Minister in his address in respect to the comments in relation to Calpe House. We also, from this side of the House, wish the trustees well. Mr. Speaker, if I may, and before setting out our stall, we have an initial observation as to the description of this year's budget. The Chief Minister describes the so-called budget as a Brexit budget. I have to hand it to him, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Chief Minister, in our estimation, is a consummate spin doctor. But the merry-go-round has finally halted, and Mr. Speaker, the music has stopped. People have stopped trusting him, the buzzwords are falling on deaf ears, and whoever he pays to write his speeches for him will soon be out of a job. The public, Mr. Speaker, are no fools. This is not a Brexit budget. This is a big lie budget. The Chief Minister claims to be prudent. He claims to be cautious. He claims to be a safe pair of hands. We've heard him say in his address that he spends wisely, Mr. Speaker. He even sets up a department set up for public efficiency, Mr. Speaker, to create the illusion that our money, the people's money, is safer in his hands. Mr. Speaker, this is all part of the big lie budget. The direct evidence for this is the Chief Minister's so-called revolution in education. The fact of the matter is that the £52 million contract for the 2 secondary schools at Waterport, Mr. Speaker, isn't included in this year's estimates. Why not, Mr. Speaker? Let's not forget that the contract does not include the fitting out of the two schools, and therefore the costs of the new secondary schools are very likely to exceed £75 million. How can this be a Brexit budget, Mr. Speaker, when trucks are hurtling down Waterport, laden with materials, the deafening sound of the thuds of the machinery operating 24/7 at enormous cost to the public? The project is devoid of any real consultation from those who will actually use those schools. Embarrassingly then, Mr. Speaker, he then jokes to anyone who would care to listen, foreign MPs, whoever, that even the opposition complain that they are moving too fast, Mr. Speaker. And he repeated it again in his address this morning. There is nothing remotely Brexit about this budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister, as we well know, is a big spender, and his cabinet the biggest cheerleaders of spending our money. Mr. Speaker, the GSLP Liberal government are penny wise, pound foolish. Mr. Speaker, it has finally dawned on the Honourable Gentleman that he has been reckless with our money, Mr. Speaker. It took him 7 years of spend, 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 and now the public, the taxpayer, and business, and indeed future generations, will be saddled with debt, debt, and more debt that he has created, Mr. Speaker, whilst he and his government attempt in a desperate scramble to spin this as a consequence of Brexit. We do not accept this, Mr. Speaker, and neither do the people listening or watching this debate. Mr. Speaker, he talked about in his contribution of 7 straight years of GDP growth at 10%, year on year, unprecedented levels of growth. He forgets, Mr. Speaker, to mention unprecedented levels of debt. Mr. Speaker, in 2011, the GSLP Liberal Alliance were elected on their now infamous Time for Change or New Dawn manifesto, promising all things to all men. To their credit, Mr. Speaker, and as anyone who has been charged with the huge responsibility administering the public affairs of Gibraltar, there are several projects and initiatives which we ourselves, as servants of the people of our community, have welcomed. We have been constructive when we have needed to be, and we have been robustly critical in areas where we strongly hold the belief that this community has been and is being taken in the wrong direction. Mr. Speaker, one such striking example is the management and administration of our public finances. Everyone understands the message. It's your money, and the government must properly and transparently account for what they are doing with your money. The issue is even more acute now because it's clear to our community that the government is parking most of its debt off balance sheet and intentionally hiding the true level of our debt from the people. I now turn to make the position of Her Majesty's opposition abundantly clear. Mr. Speaker, we will not vote in favour of this budget because it fails to present a clear, transparent, accurate and unambiguous reflection of the state of our public finances. We consider it a gross dereliction of our duty as representatives of this community to condone and support a budget which is fundamentally opaque and which handcuffs elected representatives from properly and effectively scrutinising the public finances of this community. Mr. Speaker, it will no doubt be said in reply that voting against the budget is repugnant, wrong, and we will suffer detriment by playing into the hands of Gibraltar's enemies. What utter nonsense, Mr. Speaker. Nothing can be further from the truth. No one buys that juvenile playground argument. It is true that parliamentary practice convention has meant that the opposition has traditionally voted in favour of the budget, but as the Chief Minister was at pains to teach me last time we were in this House, practice or conventions change, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is not unusual in the slightest for oppositions to vote against budgets. It happens the world over. There are, in our view, very good reasons to depart from this perceived practice. Mr. Speaker, the point is this. We, the opposition, do not know how the public's money is being spent. And in any event, Mr. Speaker, we disagree with what they're spending it on. Mr. Speaker, 2017-18 has been the Chief Minister's annus horribilis. 2018-2019 is shaping up to be no better for him. Oh well, Mr. Speaker, all good things must come to an end. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister is living off borrowed time. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not fond of quoting rappers in this House, Mr. Speaker, but I couldn't resist this one. When the Chief Minister and his ministers are all sat in the VVIP government enclosure at the GMF this year, they should reflect very carefully to their headliner Stormzy's warning in his catchy lyrics, "You're getting way too big for your boots, you're never too big for the boot." Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister's so-called 2015 strongest foundation is suffering significant structural damage, resulting no doubt from the inherent weak foundations upon which it was built. Brexit is now becoming the excuse for our woes, and we have been treated this morning to a Brexit budget, or as we like to call it, the big lie budget. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the Chief Minister no longer has his finger on the pulse of this community and the day-to-day issues that affect hard-working families. Domestic issues have been, in the main, ignored using the Brexit excuse. I've heard it being said that the Honourable Gentleman's focus must be on Brexit, but the world did not stop turning on the 23rd of June 2016, and we must carry on, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman is hemorrhaging support, and although not yet on life support, the government's condition is serious. The government are failing to address the serious concerns of working families, the vulnerable, and importantly, young people. Last year, the Chief Minister promised a budget designed with prudence in mind to support working families, young people, and the elderly and disabled. He has not achieved, Mr. Speaker, that objective. In the opposition contributions to the debate, Mr. Speaker, on the appropriation bill, each of us will deal with their respective shadow responsibilities. In particular, Mr. Speaker, our shadow public finance minister, the Honourable Roy Clinton, will address and present in granular detail the numbers, whilst the Honourable Mr. Feetham will chart the historic context which have led us to the current financial position that our community finds itself in. Mr. Speaker, we have a duty to the people that elected us to hold the government to account, particularly at budget time. The debate of the appropriation bill fails entirely to provide the public with an accurate, comprehensive and transparent account of our public finances. The government have, in 7 years, consistently denigrated and destroyed any form of oversight of our public finances, hidden debt from public view, evaded answering detailed questions on public finances from the opposition, and created a system where this House is incapable of properly and effectively subjecting the management of our public finances by the government to parliamentary scrutiny. To all those who will tune in across our community to listen or watch this debate from home or work, I am sorry to have to say to each one of them that there is very little we can do as your elected opposition to uncover the mass of hidden debt which will hang around the necks of our children and grandchildren for generations to come. But there are, Mr. Speaker, some indicators, even from the slither of information that the government has provided. From what we have been able to distill, Mr. Speaker, despite the massaging of those figures referred to by the Honourable the Chief Minister himself, our recurrent expenditure is increasing, estimated at 627,815,000 for 31st of March 2019. Our net debt is rising to 339,900,000 in 2019. Our revenue is lower at 635,849,000 at March 2018. Our cash balances are decreasing from 127,600,000 in 2017 to 96 million odd in 2019. Mr. Speaker, to our community, money coming in is down, the cost of running Gibraltar is going up, debt is rising, and our money at the bank is down, Mr. Speaker. The government is clearly not on target to honour their promise to the people to get net public debt below 300 million. The Honourable Roy Clinton will in detail assess the consequences of these startling figures, Mr. Speaker, but it is clear for the first time that the GSLP Liberal government will be running a deficit, and for the first time the donation to community care will be at its lowest. The headline figures I presented show a critically worrying trend, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is important sometimes to actually reflect on what the Chief Minister said in the New Dawn Manifesto 2011. Mr. Speaker, when we were in government, the Honourable Femi Picardo, leader of the opposition as he was then, said, on the GSD's government's own figures, we are already at least 480 million in debt in terms of gross debt. Gross debt is the relevant figure for analysis of national debt that you would see referred to in any publication considering the national debt of any country. That works out at £16,000 per man, woman and child in Gibraltar. In 1996, the figure was £3,000 per man, woman and child. The GSD then referred to that level of debt, which is now quintupled, as a millstone round the necks of future Gibraltarians. Mr. Speaker, fast forward to 2018-19, we have a situation where approximately 65% of indirect debt is now hidden from public scrutiny. The change to the legal debt limit and the over-reliance on the debt-GDP ratio, instead of linking debt with revenue coupled with hidden debt of massive proportions, indicates to all concerned that the picture being presented by the government as to the true level of public debt is entirely false and misleading. Mr. Speaker, our analysis concludes that our total gross debt level is £1.248 billion. The community will remember in the 2011, during the election campaign, the leader of the opposition then castigated Sir Peter and the GSD by saying that the gross national debt meant that every man, woman and child were exposed to a millstone round their necks of £16,000 each. Well, Mr. Speaker, pausing there and using the Chief Minister's own logic, namely the gross national debt, every man, woman and child of our community has a 37,000 reefy-style millstone round the necks of our children and grandchildren. The Chief Minister, Mr. Speaker, has almost doubled the level of exposure of this community from 16,000 on his own figures of gross national debt in 2011 to over £30,000 per every one of our people. Mr. Speaker, when the Chief Minister finally gets the Stormzy boot, his legacy will be debt, debt, and even more debt. Mr. Speaker, moving from the debt position, the result of Spain's vote of no confidence motion has provided our community with a renewed hope that the new Spanish government will be more receptive to our position. Although the dust is settling on the formation of a new Spanish government, we remain hopeful that dialogue and cooperation for the benefit of our community and the wider Campo will prevail. We have been very clear as to what our vision is for Gibraltar and that we would be seeking to achieve. 1, a restoration of the trilateral process of discussion. Bilateralism on matters that affect Gibraltar is unacceptable. In the process of discussion, there would have to be a realistic discussion to seek to achieve Gibraltar's objectives without making any concessions on sovereignty, jurisdiction and control. 2, freedom of movement of the border. 3, single market access. Mr. Speaker, we continue to press the government for the restoration of the trilateral form of the United Kingdom and the Kingdom of Spain to ensure that our rights, wishes and interests are fully protected in the context of Brexit. Mr. Speaker, Brexit, because it is in the interest of Gibraltar as a whole, we have consistently and regularly communicated our position in that we stand ready to assist. Briefings of the nature we have received do very little to persuade those on this side of the House that the Chief Minister is interested in seeking our views on the challenges that we face as a community. Mr. Speaker, the public expects both government and opposition to work together in order to ensure the best possible outcome for the people of Gibraltar. Briefings to the opposition are infrequent and contain limited information, which soon is released in the public domain. Hardly, Mr. Speaker, working together. Mr. Speaker, turning to my more specific responsibilities, industrial relations has been a year, Mr. Speaker, of industrial strife for the Chief Minister and his colleagues on that side of the House. The last 12 months have been a very low point for the government in the handling of its industrial relations. The uncertainty of the future of the contract for municipal cleaning services continued until the end of last week, and who could forget the brandishing of signs calling for an end to uncertainty by the GGCA and its Master Services members. We have all heard the pre-budget announcement of the award of the cleaning contract. Mr. Speaker, we will closely follow this award and subject it to the closest possible scrutiny before comment. The last 12 months has also seen the GHA workforce of 400 strong staging a walkout of its long-standing concerns regarding the reliance on supply workers. Its Enough is Enough campaign sent a clear and loud message that morale within the service hitting an all-time low within the GHA. It is clear to many within our community that the use of supply workers is privatisation through the back door. It will be recalled, Mr. Speaker, that in 2011 general election, the GSLP Liberal Manifesto stated, the government work and services will be carried out by direct labour, which includes employees in related entities on government pay and conditions. There will be no privatisation of government departments. Last month, Mr. Speaker, the Borders and Coast Guards took industrial action on the frontier over a similar issue and the use of supply labour. And, Mr. Speaker, the related Medoc Grand Home saga is a story which keeps on giving. Mr. Speaker, concerns are now being raised in the community and highlighted in relation to Mount Alvernia and its relationship with Medoc. Mr. Speaker, we have described the level of contract workers in the public service as unprecedented. The effect cannot be underestimated. 39% of total labour force is employed via recruitment consultants or agencies. Mr. Speaker, the opposition has been asking questions of the government in relation to the use of companies to recruit parallel labour or supply workers into different sectors of the public service for a long time now. The practice of recruiting parallel permanent labour or supply workers to work alongside permanent civil service or public service posts on different terms is pervasive and one which we say erodes workers' rights as well as security of employment. Mr. Speaker, organising your labour force in this way can seriously affect the quality of the service provided to the public. We have also said that these practices raise serious question marks over accountability, transparency, quality and value for money in the procurement of public contracts. These are all issues, Mr. Speaker, that require serious examination and an overhaul of the way things are done by the government. Mr. Speaker, moving to employment, training and skills. Mr. Speaker, on apprenticeships last year, the Chief Minister announced at budget time the introduction of T-levels. A year on and nothing further, despite our questions in this House as to the progress of this policy initiative. In fact, the Chief Minister again didn't mention it today in his address. the government has failed entirely in its commitment to young people and their families in developing a truly inspiring alternative for those who do not wish or simply unable to take the higher education route. Mr. Speaker, for too long, the government have ignored a loud call for the development of an apprenticeship programme. The government continue to ignore the skills deficit and the cliff edge, and are blinded to the call from the unions, the Chamber of Commerce, business, young people and their families. Mr. Speaker, the failure of the government's employment policy will have long-lasting consequences beyond their short time in office, and we will have to pick up the pieces when the people of this community put them back in their natural habitat of opposition. This community may forgive the honourable members for much, but not for the abject failure of the young people of this community and their families. Almost daily, Mr. Speaker, we hear from disaffected young people without hope and opportunity because of the government's failure to tackle skills training and the establishment of a fit-for-purpose apprenticeship programmes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, he talks about the jobs at lowest unemployment levels. He should speak to those young people, Mr. Speaker, stuck in dead-end jobs with no hope. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable the Father of the House, Sir Joe, has attempted to denigrate our arguments by instructing his staff to write to employers in a desperate attempt to demonstrate that there is no interest in the business community for apprenticeships. Mr. Speaker, I will never share that view of the Father of the House, and I never will shy away from telling him that. Mr. Speaker, the honourable members opposite will recall the statement by Playtech's Chief Operating Officer, which clearly supports and reinforces our long-standing commitment to investing in our future generation, so that they are the first choice for employers now and in the future. The absence of any response to this call by a senior member of our gaming industry demonstrate to those in our community and beyond that we are not serious about investing in our own people. Mr. Speaker, if we want big business to set up in Gibraltar, we need to ensure that our people are trained to do the skilled jobs required by those businesses. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Minister talked about 35 fintech companies starting in Gibraltar and the professional and services that are provided in Gibraltar to support that underlying business. But ultimately, Mr. Speaker, we want our people to do those jobs that fintech are doing to bring here and the jobs that they are creating. This is why, Mr. Speaker, we have always pressed for an apprenticeship programme that trains young people to obtain those jobs. Mr. Speaker, it requires foresight and it requires proper investment in people where the dividends will be reaped over a long period of time and not by the narrow confines of an electoral cycle. Mr. Speaker, the government's non-policy on skills training will leave a lost generation of young people without skills and our position within the global digital economy weakened. It is time for the government to abandon its future job strategy and adopt proactive policies which position our young people at the forefront of the digital economy. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Chief Minister talked about building a successful economy, but he fails to understand that fundamentally the success of our community depends on creating better opportunities for young people. In fact, I think the Chief Minister talked about pillars, and he said that young people and human resources was one pillar. It cannot work, Mr. Speaker, by operating a plugging the skills gap policy that the government are determined in pursuing. Mr. Speaker, we need to proactively shape our future by using the human resources available to us rather than reactively plugging the skills gap. We need to continue to focus on supporting startups in IT, gaming, software, development of fintech, to name a few. Mr. Speaker, I remain absolutely convinced that we need to do a lot more to truly harness the human resources we have available in our community. Mr. Speaker, many in our community will agree that creating a vibrant environment for fintech to flourish is good for our economy, but we must ensure that we encourage these type of startups or more evolved business to our shores, that we do so safe in the knowledge that we can grow our own talent in partnership with business so that we can become a centre for excellence. Fintech is proving to be a highly competitive environment with many sophisticated jurisdictions moving quickly into that space. In the experience of our gaming industry, the long-standing complaint from those companies has traditionally been the lack of skilled workforce. Let us not expose ourselves to that type of criticism again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my political clinics, housing, and those of my colleagues, housing is the #1 complaint area. Mr. Speaker, this year we focused a large part of our outreach campaign on meeting with many representatives of the so-called forgotten estates. It's fair to say that after 7 years of GSLP administration, they feel very disappointed. Laguna Estate, Mr. Speaker, is still waiting for 35 lifts to be installed. We have reports of problems at Moorish Castle last week, and Varelbeg has scaffolding erected with little or no work being done on the buildings. The main issues affect thousands, Mr. Speaker, and appears to be the never-ending refurbishment and security of our housing estates, which was clearly borne out by the Chief Minister's meeting with residents of Laguna and Glacis as recently as the 22nd of June. Mr. Speaker, our housing estates are the heart and soul of our community, and 7 years on, the government continue to be plagued by inactivity, neglect, and failing to get the job done. It is simply unacceptable for the government to take 7 years to complete works to our housing estates. I am sure that we will now have to endure all the excuses under the sun from the Minister and the Chief Minister, where they will no doubt play the blame game once again. The public are bored of their excuses, Mr. Speaker, and action must be taken to finish the job that they promised 7 years ago. Mr. Speaker, recent announcements by the Ministry in relation to the establishing of a register of residential tenancies are, Mr. Speaker, in principle, and subject to a comprehensive review, welcomed by those on this side of the House. It is wrong and an abuse for anyone who has, based on the need, has secured a government rental to rent out that property. The practice is abhorrent and should be stopped. It is equally wrong, as a matter of principle, that those who derive a rental income from their homes do not declare that income to the Income Tax Department, as it is from those who rent out their homes in breach of the terms of the underlease. This, Mr. Speaker, is not the time for public statements on how we would deal, Mr. Speaker, with housing moving into the future. The GSD has developed a key policy document which, come the next general election, will be open for the community to consider. For now, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the system is not fit for purpose. We need a radical shake-up and rethink entirely the way in which we allocate government homes and access to opportunity for government co-ownership schemes. Mr. Speaker, we will reflect on the special stamp duty in respect of the affordable homes that were purchased over 4 years and make comment to the public in due course. Mr. Speaker, I have asked the Minister for Housing and the Chief Minister several times to explain why the government have not announced the building of homes for rental, and I've been treated to the usual non-reply. An announcement will be made in due course. Mr. Speaker, there is a real need, which is not only expressed by Action for Housing, but struggling families. What is the secret about, Mr. Speaker? And we need to give hope to those who are struggling. In relation to rental arrears, in the last 12 months, the government's record on recovery is appalling. In March 2017, arrears were just over £5 million. At the budget last year, the Chief Minister stated that arrears stood at £4,995,442 and confirmed that the problem was clearly under control. At the end of April, the Honourable Lady told me that the arrears stood at £4,829,692. In January, February, March and April of last year, the figures gravitated around 4,879,000 to 4,835,000. Where, Mr. Speaker, is the success story in those figures? Nothing has changed. It is clear for all those to see that the government are failing to recover what is owed, and the problem is stagnating under their leadership. The government are failing to identify and address the root problem. Those in real social need are unable to access housing because the system is not fit for purpose. There is also systemic abuse in the housing system, which must be urgently addressed by the government. We need to revolutionise housing and only provide homes to those who need them. Our policy on means testing must be implemented alongside a range of initiatives that make the system user-friendly, accessible, and above all, fair. For instance, Mr. Speaker, how is it right that when each of our children reach the age of 18, parents feel the need to put their names on the social housing list in order to slowly creep up an archaic system to have the opportunity to buy into the government co-ownership or be allocated a government flat in the future? I have heard many, many cases when children leave for university, parents ensure that their children are on the list. So when they finish full-time education, Mr. Speaker, they get a home. Mr. Speaker, what on earth is going on with our system if that is the case? On housing lists, there are currently a total of 1,350 applicants on the pre- and housing list, as well as a small number on the social lists. Only 69 people have been allocated flats in 2018 so far. With a growing and ageing population, how does the government intend to cater for demand and evolving and changing circumstances? What contingencies are in place for a hard Brexit? Where's the investigatory or enforcement process to minimise abuse of government housing? I know that the Honourable Minister does try and help, but we must recognise that the system is fundamentally broken, Mr. Speaker. We need to operate a system based on real need. We need to provide for families, small and large, young, single parents, the elderly, key workers, and those with disabilities. The system does need a degree of flexibility, but above all, it must be fair and cater for the needs of those most in need. Mr. Speaker, on the 26th of November 2015, some 2.5 years ago, I made a promise to those who entrusted their vote to my colleagues and I that we would speak for those people in our community who felt distant from politics and politicians. I have promised that where I can, I will help. If I can't, I will say, but I'm here to listen. It has become apparent to me, Mr. Speaker, that the Chief Minister likes to use this opportunity of this debate of the Appropriation Bill not just to report to the House on public finances of our community, but the state of the economy generally and our political future facing all of us. Almost 2 years, Mr. Speaker, after my election, I was asked by the leader of the party, Keith Azzopardi QC, to lead the parliamentary party in this House after the Honourable Daniel Feetham stepped down. It is a great honour and privilege to be able to serve my community, Mr. Speaker, in whatever capacity I'm asked to serve. It is, of course, right at this juncture that this House pays tribute to the crucial role played by the Honourable Daniel Feetham in driving the party forward in opposition after 16 years in government. Mr. Speaker, opposition politics, as everyone in this House will know, is a hard, difficult and isolating endeavour. But at the best of times, it can be one of the best experiences that each of us will have. It can also be brutal, but it is also rewarding for each one of us on this side of this House. Serving our community in key domestic areas such as housing, employment, health, skills, social services and care, and understanding the plight of our community has been a privilege and an honour. Mr. Speaker, it has also been an eye-opener because despite the constant spin from the benches that drive the New Dawn propaganda machine, there is an endemic and growing discontent for the public as to the government's administration of our public affairs. Not one day goes past that each of us on this side of the House receives a complaint about this government's mismanagement of the domestic agenda. The discontent, of course, Mr. Speaker, is also coming from the government's own supporters, and they are becoming very vocal. Mr. Speaker, as I believe we will demonstrate through our various contributions that we are fundamentally at odds with the government in respect to the substance or lack thereof and the form of the appropriation bill. Mr. Speaker, to end my contribution, voting against the budget is not a decision to be taken lightly, but it stands as an important message to the public for whose money we are responsible for, that you as our elected representatives genuinely believe that the financial underpinning of our public services is being threatened by the bad management of our public finances, and we on this side of the House will not support the big lie budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.